Well, John Podesta, thanks so much for joining The World. We might start with a matter about which you have bitter personal experience, it might be said, and that's resilience to foreign interference. Now, you'd be aware, I presume, that the Australian Parliament and political parties were the subject of some cyber attack before your arrival. Is there anything you understand about Australia's institutions that would satisfy you that they are safe from intrusion?
Well, I think this is something that governments across the globe have to increase their awareness of, security of, but it's not just the problem of governance. I think what we saw in 2016, what we saw before that in the interference in the Brexit campaign, the French election, etc., is that governments, in our case, particularly the Russian government, thought there was a lot of return on investment to directly interfere, to hack into our systems, to weaponize that information to have a political outcome. You know, one thing that is well worth remembering is that in 2008, both the Obama campaign and McCain campaign were hacked by the Chinese security authorities. That was for an intelligence operation. I think they were trying to figure out, once in office, what would either one of these candidates do. It was bipartisan. I think what was different about Brexit, about 2016, and I think what we have to fear is the weaponization of that intelligence to directly interfere in democratic institutions.
So just to relate that back, John Podesta, to Australia's circumstance, obviously there was a Russian connection with the US attacks, but can you understand any Chinese interest in wanting to delegitimise or compromise Australia's democratic processes, and why?
Well, the first question is, do they have the capability? I think the answer to that is yes. I think, do they have the motive? I think, again, what we've seen by the Chinese so far has been largely an intelligence operation. Obviously, on the private sector side, they've also stolen intellectual property, used that, I think, to build their industry.
All right, well, just to continue with the Chinese presumption for the moment, do you have any reason to suspect that their motives might be retaliatory? For that, I mean some sort of action against, say, the Huawei decision.
Yeah, of course, the Australians were out with a firm position that they did not want to see their 5G networks compromised, and excluded Huawei from participation in the build out here. And I think that the Chinese are known to retaliate for that, whether that takes the form of retaliation through political activity or, sometimes in the case of more commercial activity. It remains to be seen.
Let's go to the US election, though. What's your biggest lesson learnt, would you say, from your experience in 2016? In other words, what will it take for Donald Trump to be beaten?
I think that what the Democratic candidates need to do is two things. One is to continue to make the case that he's temperamentally unfit and unqualified to be president, that he's made bad judgments, that he ran as a populist, but he governs as a plutocrat.
Do you think that sort of takes care of itself, the prosecution of that argument?
Well, I think it's kind of easy in his case because he proves it every day. And then you have to provide a positive alternative, that you can get the economy going for the middle and for the bottom, that you can get wages for the middle growing again, that you have a tax policy that's going to support a more long-term sustainable growth in the country and really benefit the middle and not only those people at the very top. And I think that's what the Democratic candidates are competing with. But ultimately, I think what Democratic voters are looking for is who can take this guy on, who can get him out of the Oval Office, who can get the country back on the path of inclusive values. And we have some exciting candidates who I think are going to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, that's the strategy. Let me ask you then about some of the candidates, just to name a few: Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and more recently, Beto O'Rourke. Is there anyone among them that you think can best prosecute those arguments or, be an adequate foil against the, it must be said, somewhat formidable skills of Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think that I well recognize that one of the things that Trump does best is always bring the conversation back to him, usually through outrage, but he always brings it back to him, and that can be a trap. So I think we're going to know that through the course of the primaries. We have 10 months before the first caucus goers go to cast their ballots in Iowa. We have debates coming up in June. So these candidates, I think, will get tested. There'll be a feel for who can really excite people to get out and organize and who's got the best answers. I would say right now there's sort of three tiers of candidates. You have at the top Joe Biden, who's likely to run, and Bernie Sanders. They both suffer from the fact that Biden's 76 and Bernie's 78.
But you really do think Biden is likely to declare his hand?
I think he's likely to run, although I think he's still until you're in, you're not in.
Yeah.
But I think he's given every indication. His team has certainly given every indication that he's going to run. There's another group that have sort of busted out of the pack, as it were. Kamala Harris, Beto. They've added a lot of excitement to the race. I'd put Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker probably in that tier. And then there are a lot of people who are accomplished, have been either people like Kirsten Gillibrand, Governor Hickenlooper, governors Julian Castro, the former successful mayor of San Antonio, but they're all kind of sitting around 1% in the national polls and in these state polls.
All right, and just finally, John, obviously hovering over all of this is one outstanding body of work, which is the Robert Mueller investigation. If and when that eventually lands in or around the primary process, what's your advice to either Democrats in Congress or those involved in the primaries about acting on that, timidly or otherwise, once it comes out?
I guess my first piece of advice is to read it before you react.
Yeah, fair enough.
And, I think Mueller's done an incredible job, professional job. He's kept the whole thing buttoned up. He's got 37 indictments. I think there are people pending trial like Roger Stone. There's the Manafort was just was dirt on Hillary. So we know there was collusion. The question is there a criminal conspiracy? And I think it's worth waiting for Mueller to finally report and render his judgment and say what he thinks about the facts, and then the rest will, I think, fall into place.
John Podesta, that is all that we have time for today. Thanks again for joining us on The World.
Glad to be here.